If you haven't heard anything about the diner, you should read the very first part of the series and go on from there. If not, here's a brief summary for those of you that don't know. For the past 7 years, I've worked as a waitress at a diner, and our customers happen to be very strange. I did say in my last post that if something interesting happens, I'll post about it. So, something did happen. Doug agreed to continue taking the night shift with us because someone has to keep us idiots alive and to make sure the diner is still standing after the night shift ends. Okay? It was strange because he usually skipped the night shift from time to time. I think he just wanted to regain some semblance of normalcy after being turned into a teenager after being kidnapped by a rainbird for a little over 3 months. Leshy had finally found La Llorona, so our 2 wolf guardians had left, which I was really sad about, but they protected us long enough, which was just about a week. Doug, Loretta, who was the other chef, Jay, who was the other waiter, and I were sitting in a booth, while the Cerberus ate the heart attack in another booth. Doug was staring in disbelief at the Cerberus, since, he never saw it before. The door opened to the diner, and Jay and I got to tend to our customer. A man walked in looking extremely disgruntled. The man kind of resembled Jay in a way, with shaggy black hair, but with blonde streaks. "Chris?" asked Jay, confused. The man, presumably Chris, looked at Jay and smiled weakly.
"Hey, Jolly."
He walked over and hugged Jay. "Hey, Christmas," Jay said, sounding like he was speaking through gritted teeth. He awkwardly patted Chris on the back. He looked like he really wanted to be somewhere else rather than being hugged by this estranged, drug-addicted twin brother. Or maybe he was uncomfortable with the fact that his brother was randomly hugging him. Doug looked like he was trying not to laugh. "Let go of me," said Jay, wiggling out of Chris's hug. Jay smoothed his shirt.
"Is that a 3-headed dog?"
questioned Chris. The Cerberus was sitting in a booth. He looked over with his 3 heads and blinked in unison at Chris before he went back to eating.
"Sure, why not?"
said Chris.
"You're not confused by the 3-headed dog?"
asked Loretta. Chris looked at Loretta.
"Hey, are you related to that green-haired forest hobo that gave me directions here?"
"No," said Loretta. "I see you met our friend Leshy," I said.
"No offense, but why are you here?"
asked Jay. Chris looked offended.
"You're not happy to see me?"
Jay winced.
"The only way I'll ever be happy to see you is when you're finally clean." "I am clean,"
said Chris. Jay didn't look impressed.
"I have been for 2 months now."
Jay stared blankly at him and asked,
"Why are you here again?"
Chris groaned and rubbed his head. He pointed at the Cerberus.
"Why aren't you freaking out about the fact that that dog has 3 heads? And why are you feeding it?" "He's a customer, Chris,"
said Jay like it was obvious.
It was obvious. "Are you going to order something?"
asked Doug.
"Sure, whatever's the cheapest thing you got,"
said Chris. Loretta and Doug nodded and went to the kitchen. Jay followed after them.
"He's not happy to see me,"
said Chris sadly. "He is," I replied. "I think he's just caught off guard." I wasn't sure if that was really how Jay felt. Jay came back with a cup of soda and a straw. He handed it to Chris.
"Why are you here?"
Admittedly, I was annoyed with the way that Jay was behaving. Chris really wasn't doing anything wrong, and Jay was acting like Chris just barged into his room without knocking, only to leave after a few seconds. Chris started.
"I was coming home from work."
"You got a job?" asked Jay, surprised. Chris had sat down at the bar counter. He nodded.
"Yeah, as a bartender. At least it's something,"
said Jay. Chris nodded.
"Yeah, the car ran out of gas on the side of a road and Officer Feel-em-up drove by." "That douche is still a police officer?"
asked Jay incredulously. Chris nodded, looking a little uncomfortable.
"Yeah, she is."
Jay groaned. "Of course she is." I really didn't want to know who Officer Feel-em-up was, but I kind of had a feeling what type of misconduct she got into just by having that nickname alone.
"Yeah, she picked me up by Hangman's Creek Drive and dropped me off by the woods,"
said Chris. That's 4 hours away, I shouted in shock.
I know,
said Chris.
She essentially gave me a starlight tour.
Starlight tour? Asked Loretta, walking in holding a plate with a hamburger and fries on it. She set it in front of Chris.
That's a thing that racist police officers do to indigenous people in Canada,
explained Chris.
Except for them, it was during winter and some men froze to death because of it. It was called starlight tours. She did that to me.
He looked at the hamburger.
Does this have pickles in it?
No, said Loretta. Jay told us that you're allergic to pickles and told us not to put any on. Chris seemed surprised at the fact that Jay cared enough to remember what he was allergic to.
Thanks, Charlie. You're welcome, Christmas,
replied Jay, sounding irritated at having to say Chris's full name. Doug came out of the kitchen holding a bottle of ketchup and set it in front of Chris.
Thank you,
said Chris. He said. The Cerberus finished up and went to the door, and I went to let him out. However, when I did so, a tall, dark brown creature walked in. It had the head of a horse, and it had hooves. It was bony and skinny, and its hooves clomped as it walked in, and it went to the bar counter. It had a thick, dark mane that was darker than its body. It sat down next to Chris, but since it was so tall, its knees went a little past its head. It looked at Chris's hamburger and fries. I looked at Jay, who grabbed a menu out from underneath the counter and set it down in front of the creature. The creature, who Doug told me was a Tikbalang since he's half Filipino, opened the menu and looked at it. Chris was staring at the creature and then looked at Jay.
So, can you say that your customers are animals?
Chris joked. Jay looked at the Tikbalang and said,
I apologize for my brother's life.
The Tikbalang snorted at that before it pointed at the baked strawberry shortcake. I took the order and the creature pointed at a hamburger. I took that order too.
Is that all?
Asked Jay. The Tikbalang nodded and I placed the order on a wheel for Loretta and Doug to get.
Hey, why aren't you freaked out by this entire thing?
Jay asked Chris.
When I get home, I'll most likely have a panic attack,
said Chris.
That sounds like you. Overreacting in minor situations and underreacting in terrible situations.
How does he do that? Asked Loretta from the kitchen.
When I was 13, I caught my hair on fire and just calmly dunked my head in the dishwasher that Holly and Jolly were using,
said Chris. The Tikbalang gave Chris a questioning look, like it was probably wondering how that scenario came about. How did you catch your hair on fire? Asked Doug.
I was staring at the fire on the stove too closely and my hair fell into it,
said Chris. Why were you looking at fire so closely?
I was bored.
He said it like it was obvious. Hey, Jay, get in here, called Doug from the kitchen. Jay rolled his eyes and grabbed a fry from Chris's plate and went into the kitchen. Autumn, get in here too, called Doug. I went into the kitchen, leaving our customers to themselves. What is it? I asked.
Here's the Tikbalang's hamburger and fries,
said Doug, setting a plate on a tray. That was how I learned what it was.
Come again?
Said Jay, confused. Tikbalang, said Doug. It's Filipino folklore. It's just a shape-shifting trickster, that's all. They live in the mountains and lead people astray. It can also turn into a human form or turn invisible. Basically a Filipino horse version of Leshy, said Loretta. Jay and I laughed at that. Doug glared at Loretta. I think Loretta's 6'3" height intimidated Doug a little since he was 6 foot. Or maybe Doug was still a bit salty about Loretta being his replacement. Loretta took a slice of baked strawberry shortcake and set it on the tray next to the hamburger.
How do you know if Chris is clean?
Asked Doug. Jay thought about it for a moment before answering.
He's clean. He looks a lot healthier than he has in a while.
Well, at least compared to that one time a few months ago when he tried to get clean before going back to heroin. I took the tray back to the dining area, and I set the plates in front of the Tikbalang. I looked at Chris. In a way, he did look healthy. But he still looked unhealthily pale, And on his arms, he had a lot of pinpricks that I assume were needle scars from heroin usage. Why did you decide to get clean? I asked. The question startled me because the thought never crossed my mind since it wasn't any of my business. The Tikbalang looked at Chris as if he was interested in the drug problems of a random human. Chris looked startled at my question, but he answered anyway.
I don't know, I just woke up and thought, is this really my life now?
He shrugged and then added,
that my former drug addict gave me a birthday present because she knew when my birthday was, and that kind of bothered me for some reason. But I haven't thought about doing heroin since I kicked it to the side.
That's good, said Jay.
And I feel better for not doing it,
said Chris. The Tikbalang reached over and patted Chris on the shoulder, as if it was saying that he was proud of Chris. Chris stared at the hand, and the Tikbalang removed it. Quick question, said Loretta. Who is Officer Feel-em-Up, and why are you angry over the fact that she still works as an officer?
Officer Mendez used to come over to our house whenever things got out of hand,
explained Chris.
Sometimes she would take our dad to spend a night in jail, and sometimes she would take our mother. Mostly it was our dad,
said Jay.
She would patrol Gallows Park, which was one spot for parties, and if the rumors on what some guys bragged about were true,
Chris implied. Loretta looked disgusted.
That's disgusting. She obviously saw no problem with it, apparently, if she continued hanging around,
said Jay.
And rumor has it, if a man turns her down,
well, said Chris. I felt angry at that.
And rumor has it, well, actually my former drug dealer told me that she heard rumors that Officer Feel-em-Up is taking drug addicts for these Starlight tours. She told me that she hasn't seen 2 of her buyers in 2 weeks.
You quickly added.
Which was 3 months ago.
But how does she know? Asked Doug.
One of those victims came back and told her. And she told me because she said that she doesn't want me to be a victim of Officer Mendez.
And how come no one is coming forward to talk about these Starlight tours? Asked Doug.
Drug addicts are worthless human beings who deserve what happens to them,
said Chris with a lot of hatred that even made Jay recoil in surprise.
At least that's what some people think. And the fact that some people really don't want to come forward and say they're drug addicts.
Have you seen the prison sentences for someone having weed? Asked Jay.
Someone could commit murder and get a lesser jail sentence than someone being caught with weed. And since she knows that I'm a heroin addict, former,
cut in Jay.
Yeah, former,
said Chris.
Thanks. She just got lucky to come across me.
The Tikbalang patted Chris on the shoulder again, and Chris looked at him.
No need to comfort me.
Chris got lucky to come across Leshy, who led him here. If Chris hadn't met him, I really don't know what would have happened. Also, Jay did get a canister of gas for Chris and drove him back to his car that was left on the side of the road. I think Jay was happy that Chris finally got clean. Also, Jay texted me that when they got back to Chris's car, Chris ended up having a panic attack. But Jay said that it was because of the fact that Chris was still terrified of storms, despite the both of them being 21, and a sudden storm ended up catching him by surprise. Well, if anything interesting happens, or if there's any updates, I'll let you know. Later!